You've heard the phrase a million times, right? The rule of law. Politicians love to talk about it, judges say they're upholding it, but what does it actually mean? It's supposed to be this cornerstone of our whole society, but almost no one ever stops to define it. Well, today, we're going to fix that. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, we'll get into why this super important principle is so, well, vague. Then we're going to look at a framework that really clears things up. After that, we'll see how these rules actually affect real people, dive into some of the controversies, and wrap up by figuring out why this idea is just so powerful everywhere. All right, let's jump right in, and we're starting with a bit of a puzzle. The rule of law. It's everywhere, right? Political speeches, court decisions, international treaties. It's treated like this sacred, fundamental thing. But here's the weird part. For something that's so important, hardly anyone can actually tell you what it is. So, what is the rule of law? It feels like one of those things we should know, doesn't it? But the answer is surprisingly hard to pin down. Okay, let's get to the bottom of this mystery. And check this out. This just perfectly sums up the problem. This line is from a major piece of UK legislation, the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005. It literally says the rule of law is this massive constitutional principle, and then it just stops. It doesn't define it. The law itself tells us how crucial this thing is, but then it completely forgets to tell us what it even is. Kind of wild, right? Okay, so if the actual written law isn't going to define it for us, then who is? Well, this is where a brilliant British judge, the late Lord Bingham, comes into the picture. He looked around, saw all this confusion, and basically said, all right, enough is enough. He decided to take on the challenge of defining this huge, slippery concept in a way that, we can all actually get our heads around. And boom, here it is. This is Bingham's core definition. Now, I know it's a bit of a mouthful. It sounds kind of dense, but the key idea behind it is actually super simple. No one is above the law. That's it. Everyone, you, me, big corporations, even the government itself, has to play by the same set of rules. And those rules have to be public, they have to be clear, and they have to apply to what happens in the future, not punish you for something in the past. It is the absolute opposite of some ruler just making up rules as they go along. So to make that big, dense sentence a little easier to chew on, Bingham broke it down into these 8 key principles. You can think of them as the ingredients in the recipe for the rule of law. And they cover the whole shebang, from making sure laws are easy to find and understand, to making sure everyone is treated equally, gets a fair trial, and, this is a big one, protecting our basic human rights. This list right here, this is basically our toolkit for the rest of this explainer. Okay, great. But what does this stuff actually look like in the real world? Because these aren't just abstract ideas for a textbook. They have huge, real consequences for people's lives, their money, and their freedom. So let's take principle 1. The law has to be accessible and clear. Bingham tells this unbelievable story about a man who was fined a massive £66,000. It was only by a complete stroke of luck that someone found out the rule he supposedly broke had been secretly canceled 7 years earlier. That's a perfect example. How can you possibly be expected to follow a law if you can't even know it exists? And this quote right here, it just nails the second principle. Our lives should be guided by clear rules, not by the random, unpredictable whims of people in power. And to show just how dangerous that can be, Bingham uses the ancient story of John the Baptist's execution. So why was he killed? Was it for breaking a specific law? Nope. He was killed because King Herod made a foolish promise to his daughter after she did a nice dance. That right there is the very definition of arbitrary power, and it's exactly what the rule of law is designed to stop. All right, so a lot of this probably sounds like pure common sense so far, but now we're getting to the parts of Bingham's definition that are a bit more controversial, the bits where some people think he went a step too far. So the whole debate kind of boils down to this. On one side, you've got what's called the minimalist view. These folks say the rule of law is just about having a fair process, an efficient machine with independent judges and equal treatment. But on the other side is Bingham. He argued that the content of the laws themselves really matters. Think about it. You can have a perfectly fair process for enforcing absolutely terrible laws. So for him, the rule of law has to include protecting fundamental human rights. And to push back against the people who said human rights were a totally separate issue, Bingham just asked this devastatingly simple and powerful question. It really cuts through all the complicated legal arguments. Because look at the rights he's talking about. This isn't some fringe wish list. We're talking about the absolute bedrock of any decent society, The right to life, a ban on torture, freedom from slavery. Like he asks, which one of these would you be willing to give up? And the Chahal case is a perfect modern example of this in action. The UK government wanted to deport a man they considered a threat to national security, but the European court stepped in and said, nope, you can't, because he faced a very real risk of being tortured if he was sent back. This is where the rubber meets the road, and you see that tension, upholding the absolute ban on torture, even when it's a decision that's really unpopular with a government that's focused on security. This is where those abstract principles become very, very real. So let's bring it all home. We've defined this big idea, we've seen it in action, we've looked at the debates. So what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this matter so much to every single one of us? Well, for Lord Bingham, the answer was crystal clear. The principles that make up the rule of law are quite simply the best system humanity has come up with so far. It's the best recipe we have, not just for building a just and fair society for ourselves, but also for making sure we have peace and cooperation around the world. And he left us with this final, really memorable thought. In a world that is so full of divisions, the core ideas of the rule of law are something almost everyone, everywhere can agree on. He called it the nearest we're likely to come to a universal secular religion. It's so much more than just a dry set of legal rules. It's a shared belief in fairness, in justice, and in basic human dignity. And that, well, that is a foundation worth understanding and absolutely worth defending.